Richard, welcome to Easy Conversations. Thank you for joining me today. Evening for you, morning for me, but really looking forward to our conversation. I've had an opportunity to read a lot of your work over the last few weeks, and I'm amazed by how much content you put out there. I'm definitely going to ask you about how you're inspired to continue and what type of discipline you use. But before we jump into our discussion today, I'm interested to know a little bit more about yourself, who you are, and where you are in your current chapter of your life.
It's been a long story, and I haven't really had a career so much as a journey which I've paid attention to in terms of opportunities and wanting to do different things. And really, Fahan, it started, I can remember the day vividly, the day before my 13th birthday.
Mm,
I was lying on the downs in southeast England above Cookmere Haven, feeling very homesick for Australia, and acknowledging the incredible education I was getting, but also realizing that it had nothing to do with me. It was about all the problems of the world that had been solved by everybody else, and nothing really related to my own personal experience of the world. And it was on that day that I decided that come what come what may, I would live an extraordinary life. That was my
mm,
pledge to myself. And I've more or less tried to do that, but it, having stuck to that path, it's not been a career. I've done very different things. I've been different things to different people. And I'm now coming up to my 81st birthday this year and thoroughly enjoying life. And the pledge I have now is that on the final day of my life, whenever that is, I want to be able to go out absolutely used up and exhausted, but shouting, "Hey, what a ride that was."
yeah. You look pretty fresh and good for 81. What's your secret, man? Has it been just this desire to keep going and learning and sharing?
Curiosity,
Yeah.
curiosity of the world. And I've done a lot of travel. I've
Mm,
worked with so many people around the world. I've been so privileged in working with some amazing people and groups. And they've offered me incredible opportunities to grow and to mature and to think differently and to
hmm
open to different cultures. I think that's part of it. I also have 10 children, and as children keep you young.
Yes.
And my youngest, I actually homeschool as a
Mm,
single parent. He's on the autism spectrum, and he's teaching me incredible things. That's another thing. And the third thing is I've had 4 relationships. So I've loved 4 women in my life
mm,
and still do. And each time the relationship has got younger. So my current partner is only 37 years old,
mm,
and youth keeps it. We live a celibate relationship, but it's inspiring and it's gentle and it's intimate in a way which is different to all of the others.
mhm,
I think that keeps me young as well. And yeah, but
mhm.
curiosity.
And what I hear in a lot of the things you're sharing is you're constantly growing as well, right? You're doing things differently, which allows us to grow. And often we get stuck in a bit of a box around how society defines what things need to be, even like a relationship, for example.
Oh yes, with my relationships, for example, my previous relationship, I'm actually in her house now. We're such good friends. We support each other, we still love each other. And this whole notion of you must divorce when that happens or this
Mm,
happens, absolutely not. So, with everything in my life, when I come across a problem or an issue, I go back to first principles and think through
mm,
what I want rather than what's the conventional wisdom in this situation.
hmm And I feel like the word philosopher gets thrown around a lot and it's been used over since for millennia, right? So, how do you internalize that for yourself? What does that mean for you?
That's a lovely question. It's a question I've never been asked. For me, it's working. working that curiosity at a
Mm-hmm.
civilizational level. I'm
Mm,
fascinated in terms of the human family, the richness of the human family, the diversity, and the way we all interpret the world and our reality differently. That's what I find intriguing.
mm-hmm.
And most of my work has been probably at that level. Bruno Latour, actually, months before he died, was very kind and noted that the work I've done in civilizational theory and world system theory has been seminal. So I think
Mm,
that's where my effort mainly is.
mm-hmm. So what you talked about that very early age of being 13 and having this realization. So what shaped your ideas, or what has continued to shape your ideas? What were your early influences to perhaps push you in that direction?
My early influences were probably music. I was a cathedral chorister in
Mm,
England, and it was inevitable that the whole ethos and ambience of that upbringing would have an impression. And for my early years, apart from a brief stint in medicine, which didn't really come off, my early years were devoted to music. I'm a published composer and conductor. And I really thought that was going to be my life's path. But
mm,
I was writing music which was called The New Complexity. And that probably gives you an inkling as to the kind of music
mm,
it was in terms of giving your ears a good bashing.
yeah.
And it turned out that musicians had to be really dedicated to learn the music, which was so difficult to learn. And then
Mm,
once they'd spent 4 months or 5 months learning the piece, the numbers of people that actually wanted to listen to that music was diminishing rapidly. And
mm,
so it was in 1984, I think, that I made the decision, which was one of the most profound decisions of my life, to stop writing music and use
mm,
words instead to write books. It was a traumatic moment, but it was, in a sense, inevitable.
mm, mm. No, I appreciate that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a, you write a lot, right? So what keeps you going? How do you keep yourself accountable? What is the discipline behind your approach to be able to write so frequently and so much?
There are two factors. The
Mm,
first is my head is so full of ideas, I just need to get those ideas out. And
yes.
they come out fully formed. I don't
Mm,
really type or write a book. I actually compose it and speak it. I use a voice to text app. And this is important because I have arthritis in my fingers. So if I was
mm,
relying on typing, it would be much slower. But
mm,
also, a lot of the ideas stem back a long way. So the book I've just published, which is called Dancing with the Future, was started 28 years ago. And so a lot of the time, I'm actually completing and fulfilling the ideas that were germinating then, but have come to fruition now after a lot of reflection and contemplation and deep reflection.
mm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll definitely come back to some of the ideas there too. But you've been around for a while, right? 8 decades. You've traveled the world.
Mm.
What are you seeing in the world now, in today's world? Why does it feel so unstable? Or is it just, it's always been that way? And we're seeming to, because of globalization and our ability to connect with everyone, it just seems that way.
I think probably both. I would imagine that previous generations, to some extent, thought the same about change.
Mm-hmm. Mm,
There's a key difference for us because, in terms of civilizations, civilizations have come and gone.
mm,
We've been able to compost and them and their ideas and create new civilizations. The key difference today is that you've mentioned is our interconnectedness,
mm-hmm.
that we're all in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
We are creating the conditions universally that are not at all helpful in terms of sustaining life.
Mm,
And so we've reached a very critical point, I think, which is different. It's unique to what's happened previously. Now, the one of the problems is that what we rely on to gain stability, a kind of anchoring of our identity and purpose, has been subjected to, I'd call it destruction in terms of propaganda. You
mm,
cannot now rely on any mainstream media at all, and probably even less on social media to find the truth or
mm,
distinguish between different things. I think it's very different now. And I think
mm,
that's both an opportunity, well, a problem and a huge opportunity for the human family to come together and think as one rather than
mm,
the fragmented world of collapse that we're currently in, and
mm,
it's a necessary component into coming out to form something new and different.
mm. Yes, I agree with you on that. But to your, because of, excuse me,
Mm,
because of the propaganda and the fragmentation around that, how do we find that opportunity to come together, right? And maybe there's parts of it happening in different parts of the world, but collectively, I just see it there, the distance growing
mm.
as opposed to us coming together.
Yes, that's a very accurate way of saying what's happening, in fact, because
Mhm,
and it's fragmenting and it's a coming together. There are things happening in terms of individuals and communities around the world. It's very patchy, but
mhm,
there are wonderful things happening that you would have to say, you would hope could be the future of our species in terms
mhm,
of governing differently, of thinking about relating to each other differently, and to the world, the living world we rely on. Uh,
mm,
but we've also got that fragmentation going on.
mhm,
I often use the analogy of the dissolving chrysalis. So in the chrysalis, it's just melting. The immune system of the caterpillar tries to fight the cells that don't fit,
mm,
the imaginal cells, but they carry the DNA of the butterfly. And so we're in
mm,
that state at the moment of limbo in between the dissolving caterpillar and the emerging butterfly.
mm,
And I think the imaginal cells need to find each other, link up.
mhm,
And that's what happens in biology in the chrysalis. And that's
mm,
what we want to do in the world. We want to find each other, and then we can scale. And I think
mm,
probably the key,
mhm,
rather than thinking conventionally about monumental change, that,
mhm,
here is the paradigm we're in at the moment. Here's the paradigm we need to reach for. I don't think
right.
it works. I think it's more atomistic than that.
Mm. And I think part of it would be helpful to understand what are some of the challenges and the problems that we're seeing. And one of the things you've talked about in detail is the rise of authoritarianism, right? So,
Mm.
what are you seeing in that, and how are you yourself able to predict to a certain extent that coming into fruition?
Yeah. The Okay. So there are two questions there. The
Mm-hmm.
authoritarianism is predictable when you're in a position of authority and you
Mm,
no longer know what to do or how to do it. Paul Polman, when he was group chief executive of Unilever, on leaving, said something remarkable, which I remember, excuse me, very vividly. And he said, the expertise and knowledge that qualified me for the top position yesterday is precisely the expertise and knowledge that disqualifies me from knowing what to do today.
mm-hmm.
And I think what happens when people are in power, when they're politicians or they're CEOs of companies, and they don't know what to do. The easiest thing to do is to instruct and to say, well, do this or do that, or this is what we're going to do. So the kind of authoritarianism we're seeing around the world, in one sense, is a result of us dealing with the complexity and not knowing what to do and taking the easier path by saying, okay, we'll do this.
Mm,
Um, the other thing, the other element that's part of that is that, and this has been proven by research only recently,
mm,
that heating climate universally, globally, which I don't know what your beliefs are, but for me, it's not a belief, it's just a fact,
mm,
it's scientific.
mm. Yes.
And it's been proven that heat in the atmosphere can cause us humans to be more irritable, to get more frustrated, to get more angry more easily than
Mm,
before. And I think that too is a component of the
mm,
authoritarianism that's arising around the world. There are other
mm.
factors, obviously, but they're the two that really interest me.
Okay, okay. And what about like, so again, bringing it back to propaganda, I suppose, so maybe there is an aspect of the vulnerability to getting angered easily, but what I notice a lot of the times, it's playing on people's emotions, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's fear or anger, which I think are often connected. But to your point, even before that, not trusting the media or social media, but that's where people are consuming a lot of their information and then they're responding with their emotions.
Yes.
So
We,
it's
we,
all
we-
packaged together, right?
yeah, we have to understand that the algorithms are manipulative, and they're
Mm-hmm.
manipulative because the platforms need to make money. It's all about money. Uh,
Mm,
the the paradigm that we're in, which I call industrial economism,
mm,
indicate that it started in the Industrial Revolution, and it's
mm-hmm,
dominantly a paradigm of more production, more consumption, and like a Ferris wheel accelerating that you can't get off. Um, that so the platforms need to make money, and they've learned that the algorithms that cause fear and outrage, particularly, hold our attention. And if they can hold our attention, they make money. So that's
mm-hmm.
part of it as well. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things when we were talking about authoritarianism, you had predicted was with the United States. And now there's a lot of conversation there. We talk about democracy, and to me, it doesn't align, right? So meanwhile, there's focus on the third world and trying to implement democracy in those parts of the world. But when you look at the United States, what is your perception of democracy there? And do they need to focus on themselves first before they start looking at other countries?
The US, the land of the free, has never been a democracy. It,
Mm,
it was never conceived by the founders as a democracy. It
mm-hmm,
a protection racket. Um, and the US is in a stage of collapse. If you look internally at the infrastructure in the US, which I'm sad about because it's an
mm,
incredible country with incredible diversity of people. Until perhaps 20 years ago, it
mm-hmm,
fully entitled to claim the kind of moral authority that it had in the world. But after 2001, it started losing that moral authority, if it did have any,
mm,
at a rate of knots. But if you look at the infrastructure, if you look at bridges and roads and pavements, if you look at homelessness, if you look at the educational system and what it's actually producing, you look at the healthcare system,
mm,
um, it's really, when we talk about the US in the news, we're talking about Washington, D.C., we're talking about the, the governance of the US. When you talk about the US as an imagined community of people, you're talking about a community in distress.
mm,
So I think what the US is doing is an example of what we need to go through in order to, in terms of at a civilizational level, to come out with the other side with different values, a different proposition, different principles to live by, which are mostly relational rather than
Mm,
transactional, um, and inevitably create a different kind of relationship between, not just between humans, but between humans and the planet, and
yes.
other life, the non-human life that we rely on and that we've tended to dismiss as
Mm,
not being real life, whereas in fact, I mean, it's actually quite extraordinary if you look at some species. If you look at an octopus, for
mm,
example, and the 8 brains it has, and how it functions, to for us to pretend that that is not sentient life
mm,
is really ignorant.
mm, mm. And some of the things you're touching on, I wanted to ask you about too, was in terms of improving like businesses and government. You talk about whole system thinking.
Mm.
What is whole system thinking for to ground up myself and the audience that perhaps don't understand what that means?
Okay, so when I talk about whole systems, I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about if you take you or me as
Mm-hmm.
human systems, that is a whole system. We are complete in ourselves. We can persist. We can endure. We can live. We can think. We can look forward. And our energy comes from the relationship we have with others. It's the
Mm-hmm.
Ubuntu, um, I am because we are. Um, and so whole systems are sets of relationships and dynamics in constant in constant change. And you can scale that to the human family, which is 8.5 billion people now on the planet. You
Mm-hmm.
can scale it to the planet itself, or Gaia, which is a living system in its own right. So,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm talking about in the whole systems is systems that can endure, that are viable in their own right, but rely on relationships and communication and identity and purpose to be able to do that.
Mm. And you've talked about purpose a couple of times now. What does that mean from your perspective? Because I feel the word purpose gets thrown around a lot too nowadays, and everyone's talking about finding their purpose or living life with purpose. What does that mean in this context from your standpoint?
The the thing I've never understood
Mm,
is the homogenization and standardization of everything. If you just take education, for example, the notion that we're all the same, and so we can sit the same exam and should be able to remember the same, regurgitate the same facts,
mm,
is really only preparation for what was required in the factories in the late 18th century. Um, it's not what's required today, in it we still have that same system. For
mm,
me, the most important thing about a human being is that we are all a gift. We are all unique. We are
mm,
all creative. We all bring our own understanding and identity and ideas and relationships and everything about us. We're unique, um,
mm,
as just as fingerprints are unique. And I
mm,
think the world that denies that, that tries to suppress that, is not a good world to live in. And so, in terms of human purpose, what I look for is liberty and freedom of that gift that we
mm,
have. The greatest gift, of course, is to love and be loved and to be able to help each other. That's the greatest
mm,
gift.
mm-hmm. And do you feel culture can sometimes influence that? Whereas in the West, it's a bit more individualistic, which aligns with that whole idea of being unique. But then in collectivistic cultures, you're again kind of put into a bit of a box that, this is your responsibility to the group. whether that's the family or the tribe. And then that uniqueness is sometimes lost. But you see a lot of collectivistic cultures thrive because there is that unitary aspect of it, right? Which is something else you're talking about.
Hmm.
Do
Yeah.
we need to be so binary at times?
No, that's one of the real problems that
Mm,
we have. If you go back to the principles of industrial economism,
mm,
which includes predatory capitalism, but isn't that in total, it
mm,
Cartesian logic, which you're referring to, which is that
mm.
binary mind body, left right, black white,
Yeah.
where we classify any problem as either or, and
Mm,
see that in debate in parliaments and governments. And it's one of the real problems of our time, that compartmentalization and the reduction of everything to a binary
mhm,
in it. And one of those, I must confess, is the notion of problem solution. I see that
mm,
real problem because we've been so inculcated with that culture, especially in the late 90s, early 20th century, in business schools, that it's
mm,
become the ordained way of dealing with every problem. But some problems don't have solutions, or they need accommodations or
mm,
consolations rather than solutions. So we need
mm,
to go back to first principles and rethink even that. So
mm.
I've diverted. I can't remember the question now.
Well, I was just talking about the cultural aspect of
The culture.
individualism and yeah, collectivism.
Well, the cultures are really interesting because that
Mm,
richness is one of the wonderful things about being
mm,
human, what it means to be human. I live in Thailand. I'm in the northeast of Thailand at the moment, and it's
mhm,
a collective culture. And you've pointed out the characteristics of those cultures. And the individual nature of it arises in different ways than in the
mhm,
West. So it's still quite inventive and it's still evolving. I do a lot of work in China, and it's the same there, all over this region. And the major difference right at the moment is the energy in this part of the world, the global South generally, and Asia and Southeast Asia, is the different energy in terms of what the future can be, rather
mm.
than closed off into what it must be, because that was what it was, which is what the predominant view in the West.
Yes, yes. And you've made reference to the Industrial Revolution and the e- industrial economy. And then there's the whole notion of capitalism. And there's this constant debate about, is capitalism good? Is it bad? Do we need to separate it from crony capitalism? And then looking at socialism as bad. And the other thing I've been reading about is how capitalism often leads to private corporations really taking control and then focusing on their wealth as opposed to for the general population. And I don't know if there's one solution. Again, this goes back to the binary thinking, but are we looking at the wrong problem when we're having these debates as opposed to looking at some of the solutions you're talking about and innovation, creativity, all of that? Does that get lost in having these debates? So I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at you, but yeah.
No, well, okay, so fundamentally, when
Mm-hmm.
when you live inside a paradigm,
Mm,
as we do more or less globally now, industrial
mm,
economism is a global phenomenon. In other words, making stuff and buying stuff and consuming stuff, and more all the time, is the dominant religion.
mm,
It's very difficult to see from within inside that system other alternatives. You can't say, stop the world, I want to get off.
mm,
But I do think that the fundamental questions that we should be asking are not being asked.
mm,
So instead of um, asking questions that kind of skate around on the surface, like, is capitalism good or is it evil, which isn't
mm,
a useful question to be asking.
mm,
The kind of question we should be asking is, what kind of economic system would benefit more people? And there's a little tiny tool that I use when I'm making decisions of any kind, which I call the Trimunery, and
mm,
that is what we're doing good for us? Is
mm,
it good for our children and future generations? And is it good for the planet? So inevitably, I ask the Trimunery question in terms of an economy. How can we create an economy that fulfills those three questions in a positive and beneficial manner? And it's not the system we've got at the moment.
mm,
It's the same with
mm,
governance. The system of governance we have, and it doesn't matter where you look. You can look at um, different ideologies and different uh, operational systems, if you like, operating systems.
mm,
First of all, democracy isn't working anywhere in the world as intended.
mm,
That's one thing. Whether it would be the solution if it were, I'm not at all sure, given the
mm,
complexity and scale of the problems we have today. So a whole host of problems still need um, different answers. And
mm,
go back to first principles and rethink everything, I think.
mm-hmm. And coming back to the whole system thinking, how do you then strategically design relevant solutions from that perspective then?
Okay, so that's a very granular question because it depends
Mm,
on the circumstances, the situation. One of
mm,
the things that I'm known for is the work I did in the middle 90s and
mm,
towards the early 2000s within organizations when I was working with large organizations. And that question was being asked at the time. And
mm,
what I did was I invented tools and methods which had allowed us to interrogate the whole system in different ways by asking different questions in
mm,
order to find the systemic acupuncture points. In other words, the points at which you could intervene in the most benign way possible, not the most um, uh, innovative necessarily,
yeah.
not the most destructive or disruptive, but in the most benign way possible that would predictably change that system. And
Mm,
this little tool called systemic acupuncture, certainly within that context, is one of the tools I use all the time. And it relies on being able to see, identify, and visualize the patterns that are under the surface and connect
mm,
those to see, well, how are those interacting and where
mm,
could we intervene that would change that?
mm. Yeah, I like the acupuncture piece of it, just even visualizing it. I think there's a holistic view of it, right? As much as you may think it's a specific point you're targeting, there's
You go,
interconnection.
it's not necessarily one point because when you model,
Exactly.
you might have thought, okay, well, no, it doesn't work. So we'll use a different point because now the patterns have changed in this way.
Yes.
Fundamentally, too, Farhan, it's important to understand the difference between leverage and
Mm,
acupuncture because leverage is a mechanical notion
mm-hmm.
and it requires effort. And human organizations are not machines. They are,
Mm,
they're organic. They're not machines.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, fair enough. So, what, as part of that work, or generally speaking, what lessons do you have for leaders and organizations based on this systemic acupuncture or this way of thinking when you're coming up with solutions?
Oh, the first lesson is irrespective of where you sit in terms
Mm,
of your status or position, you are not necessarily a leader.
mm,
It's the nomenclature is wrong.
mm,
They are managers, and some of them are very good managers, and they manage in a very advanced and sophisticated way. But the whole language of leadership, which came out of the business schools to make more money, essentially in the late 1950s, early 60s, is wrong. Leadership
Mm,
is a collective, shared phenomenon where people are motivated to get together to improve one or more aspects of the human condition. It's a shared
mm,
phenomenon. It has nothing to do with power or status. So we need to separate that first of all. The second lesson for those people in positions of authority is to actually find ways to create intelligence within the enterprise, within the organization, and to use that strategic intelligence more
mm,
intelligent, more wisely. Because at the
mm,
moment, hierarchies impede that what I call learning metabolism, the speed at which an organization can sense something's happening, make sense of it, and respond appropriately to whatever it is.
mm, mm. And can you expand on that? How are hierarchies limiting that? Because you're having to go through this top-down approach as opposed to if it was more, I'd say, flattened, that would make it easier to address situations.
Well, if you talk about flat organizations, that creates different problems.
Mm,
But what you've got to understand is an organization is an organic enterprise.
mm,
It's an organism. And once you understand the organism, then you have to think in terms of viability. What are the things, what are the systems in the enterprise that allow it to endure and deal with risk and and actually create a culture that is beneficial and rather
mm,
than harmful. I mean, so the viability, I would point your listeners to, if you're really interested in organizational viability, the best person to go to is Stafford Beer and his viable systems model, which was modeled on the human body and is essentially 5 subsystems that need to interact in order to create a fully operational and effective system that can endure, is viable, in other words. And I use
mm,
system methodology a lot in organizations. Once I usually start at CEO or board level, which is
mm,
just because of habit. That's where it is expected that I interact, although
mm,
not necessarily. In fact, in my career, I've been on the shop floor. I've done different things in
mm,
organizations. But once you can cut through the hubris and expectations and habits at board level, and they can see the enterprise differently and can express that differently and communicate that differently within the enterprise in terms of reporting relationships and
mm,
delegations and all of that, then you can begin to cut through to organizing differently, so
mm,
the organization can become a viable system in its own right.
mm. And would it be fair to say if you've got that viable system, then it would require minimal interference?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes,
which is
it
part of the
requires
problem.
monitoring
Mm-hmm.
and and monitoring the patterns uh,
Mm,
that you see within the business ecosystem. That's not
mm,
just the organization, but the organization is in a niche and it sits in this business ecosystem. There are lots of other players in that business ecosystem. So you need to understand how those are interacting in real time. And you
yes.
need people whose job it is to do that.
Mm,
But certainly from a management point of view, management becomes so easy. It really does.
mm,
I
mm,
started that when I was working with W. Edwards Deming. I was very fortunate to be able to work with Deming, and we worked, for example, in Boeing. This is going back many years.
mm,
At that stage, the chief notion out of the business school and the consultants were the hierarchy of teams. And it became kind of standard methodology within Boeing. And it was creating no end of problems because projects were going over budget and over time, and it was leading to hugely competitive behavior between the teams, which was deliberate. That was what it was set up to do. And we looked at that very closely, and we agreed, well, hang on a moment, they need to collaborate more effectively. That's going to solve some of the problems they have. So, systemic acupuncture, we found the easiest solution was actually to appoint a manager
Mm,
whose role it was not to be fixed to any one team. His role
mm,
was nomadic, peripatetic, so that when teams discovered something new that worked really well, it would be shared immediately with everybody else. And that
mm,
was his job, to make sure that
mm,
everyone shared that experience.
mm,
And it was extraordinary how it culturally changed the company at that time. It was quite amazing. But I've done
mm,
similar things in so many different enterprises,
mm, mhm.
all
Yeah.
unique, all unique, all
Yes.
different.
Yeah. So it's a bit of the cross pollination, right? The managers serving that purpose.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So forward looking now, obviously there's a lot of conversations now with AI. There's fear around AI taking away jobs and jobs becoming redundant. And then some people are making the case that no, it's going to create more jobs. What is your view on where we're headed now as humans in terms of technology and AI?
With AI, it's both. It
Mm,
is it already is taking jobs, but that's nothing new. Every
mm,
new technology has done that. If you look at, as I mentioned, my early career in music, the the sound recording engineer no longer exists. That
mm,
role has disappeared entirely. So
mm,
that's dynamic. That will always happen. But AI, um, with one caveat, because right at the moment, the large language models seem to have maxed out on what they can do, and they can do a lot. It's
mm,
very smart. But AI to me is amplified insights. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It's really a reordering of what already exists.
mm,
And so what this gives us is yet another opportunity to really focus on what only humans can do: the curiosity, the creativity, um, the the way that we are able to connect ideas that apparently that you know otherwise the, no apparent connection, but there are. We can find them. Um,
mm,
there are so many opportunities, and also, to be honest, to find freedom from that working life paradigm where we spend so many hours a week in drudgery, which machines can do faster and better than us, to release ourselves to have more time with family and friends, to actually enjoy living on such an extraordinary planet.
mm,
Um, so we need to change the fundamentals of human existence and do away with the puritanical notion that work is automatically good for us, when a lot of
mm,
the work we do is bullshit.
mhm. Yeah, fair enough. So, what I'm hearing from you is the opportunity that AI would create is to remove work. So then a lot of the common theme that you've been sharing is humans can actually focus on building relationships and not so much on work that is separating them away from their families, their communities, society at large.
Yes, I think work is still important. It is working is a wonderful impulse if you enjoy doing it and it is your
Mm,
life. But when it
mm,
becomes a drudgery, and that drudgery can be done better by a machine, then give it to
mm.
the machine and do something different.
Right. Yeah, and many clients I work with in the therapeutic standpoint, part of their pain point is exactly what you're saying is work feels like a chore. It's not something that they enjoy, but that's where that conversation of purpose comes up again. So is it fair to say if you can give it to the machine, that allows you to then focus on your unique purpose, whatever that may be, that allows you to feel fulfilled, which then also improves your personal connection with yourself, but then even the relationships you have.
Yes, that is so. But again, there's a caveat because the
Mm,
conditions around you need to be able to support you in
yes.
doing that. And right
Mm,
at the moment, we go back to the paradigm we're in. That's
mm,
not the friendly paradigm to that new way of living. And
mm,
so, one of the things we have to do at a societal level is to be able to create the conditions whereby that new essence of what a human being actually is can be fulfilled and can burgeon and take off.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And a lot of the times we get stuck in this debate again about creating utopia and how the utopian state is not what we truly desire as humans, because we always need some sort of friction. And a lot of thinkers in the past have talked about the downside of having utopia, but this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about it, a way of living that is still challenging you and allowing you to grow, but at the same time, you're living in harmony with everyone around you.
Yes, and there's a sense of fulfillment. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's absolutely critical. I mean, I have been so lucky. I've done so many different things, and
Mm-hmm.
I've suffered relationship breakups and divorce. I've sacked. I've lost my job. I've moved from one continent to another,
Mm-hmm.
and I've gone through various traumatic experiences, and that's part of being human too.
Mm-hmm.
Pain is, I think, um, a critical component of what it means to be human, because without pain, there is no measure of pleasure or joy. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I really do think that fulfillment, you don't escape being human. Um,
Yes.
so that's not possible. But what you do is you create the conditions whereby your feelings are more rounded and your
Mm-hmm.
sense of fulfillment um, is is there. I think that's so important because a lot of crime, a lot of loneliness, a lot of that. I mean, we've got a pandemic of loneliness at the moment, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the ailments in society at the moment are the result of not being able to feel fulfilled in terms of our life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And is it fair to say, so, we've talked about the Industrial Revolution. You can look back at the Agricultural Revolution. Do you feel like we're at a similar turning point as a civilization where there's a new revolution coming in place, or we've already passed that? And then in hindsight, we could probably say that, yeah, this was the point. We just don't know that yet.
I think we're in the chrysalis, in a
Mm,
state of dissolution, um, and and it's you have to remember, excuse me, that that dissolving of the old is part and parcel of forming the new. So
mm,
all doom and gloom. That what is collapsing and what is failing has to fail and has to
mm-hmm,
collapse in order for the new to
mm-hmm.
evolve.
Yes.
So I think we're in the middle of that now. Having
Mm,
having lived 80 years and watched this acceleration in the the factors that cause failure and collapse,
mm,
I'm now convinced that we're beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel and
mm,
the darkest moment. But I am optimistic in that sense.
mm. So are you saying that we're still yet to go through the darkest moment, or we're in the midst of it?
I think we're in the midst of it at the moment. I think what we're seeing around the world in terms of conflict and war, particularly, and
Mm,
the the no, I can't say that. Um, yeah, well, what we're seeing at the moment is probably the darkest moment,
mm,
the dark night of the soul of,
mm,
of being human.
mm-hmm. And you're talking more at a collective level, but I feel like even individually, we all kind of go through those dark night of the soul moments. I know I've gone through some of that, and those what emerges is something beautiful. But as you're talking about, when you're in it, it is painful because the old is dying, it's dissolving, and what's emerging is something powerful. And not a lot of people can withhold that. And I think one of the things we talk about in therapy is pain may seem like it's not optional, but suffering is optional. And a lot of the times we choose that suffering instead of powering through it. What are your thoughts on that piece, and how many of those critical points have you experienced in your life? I know you've talked about experiencing failure, right? Whether it's relational or career wise too, but what has emerged from those moments in your life?
I've been very resilient
Mm,
ever since. At the age of 8, I lost my dad.
yeah.
Uh, and living in England at the time, he ran off with another woman. And in that culture at that time, that was forbidden. Nobody talked about it. And so
Mm,
it was, for me, that was a huge loss. And I agree with you. I think the anguish that we deal with as humans is part of being human. But one of the problems, again, we have is industrial society tells us that if we buy more stuff, we'll be okay. We'll feel better.
mm,
Go and upgrade your iPhone. You'll feel better about it. Take a holiday. Or if you're depressed, go on some drugs. That'll
mm,
sort things out. Instead
mm,
of, again, thinking through, well, what are we actually missing? If we go to indigenous societies and understand the wisdom of a lot of those First Nations people, then they already had solutions before we created a pharmaceutical industry. Going back to nature, actually being in nature is one of those. Uh,
mm-hmm,
Literally, I mean, taking your shoes off and standing in the earth, um, and not resorting to a pill when there are other things that are more important. And certainly, as you will know, the general research into depression comes
mm-hmm,
back to who are your friends? Uh,
mm-hmm,
what do you talk about to your friends? How
mm-hmm,
often do you see your friends? What's your social milieu?
mm-hmm,
Uh, because that's absolutely critical. Relationship
mm-hmm.
is critical.
Yes. Yeah. In addition to relationships, I think a lot of the research I've come across too is having a sense of gratitude, which I often translate into service as well.
Mm.
And we don't often focus on that, is how am I serving other people? And it doesn't always have to be monetary. It could be with our time, with our skills. And I think we've lost sight of that too. So I agree. I think it's both. And in that form of service, it also allows us to build better connections with people.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as you know, I live in Bangkok, and when I go into
Mm,
the city, there are quite a few homeless people begging. And so, yes, I will give someone 20 baht,
mm,
but I will sit down, I'll smile, I'll
mm-hmm,
try and talk to them. Um, I might get them a drink or a sandwich or something, and try
mm-hmm,
and engage them in in a more optimistic view of, here am I, another human being, and I
mm,
want to talk to you. You matter to me. You're
mm-hmm,
important. And I think the satisfaction I get from that
mm.
is enormous. It's you
Yeah.
can't measure it.
No, I agree. It's beautiful. What gives you hope then about, I know you've touched on a lot of things around how this is a crucial turning point we're going through as a civilization, but what gives you hope on the other side of it?
Um, Living in this region, particularly where there's a very different kind of energy in terms of the future,
Mm,
which is seeing more evolution than dissolution,
mm,
because I think it's the Western paradigm that's really collapsing. And so, yes, we're affected by it here, but there are other things emerging fast. If you just go to Shenzhen, for example,
hmm
it's for a lot of Western people, it's the cultural shock would be immense because it's like stepping 30 years into the future. Everything is
Mm,
green, people are smiling, everything is friendly, you want help, you get help. And it's a futuristic landscape as well. And the the whole notion of calm and peace is on everybody's lips, not
mm,
war and conflict and bombing and enemy.
mm,
The
mm,
language here is very different. The second thing that gives me hope is youth.
mm,
If we can release them from the incumbent patriarchy of my age,
mm,
that because we exist and because we've created a lot of the problems, seem to believe that we also have the solutions. We
mm,
need to get out of the way and, yes, be available for advice or wisdom if we have it, but allow young people to do the work that needs to be done
mm, mm,
rather than trying to say, you don't know, we know, listen to us.
mm. And a lot of the things that you're talking about and encouraging to the listeners and myself, what comes up for me is a sense of unity, right? And a form of love that I feel like is missing, right? Because you were giving the example of the otherization, which often leads to war. But if we were to come together and have this shared sense of purpose and love and community, things would change. And for me, I've been able to find that in terms of my own spiritual connection. And I feel sometimes when that's missing, it's easier for us to turn against each other because the way I've been able to visualize it through conversations with other people is if I can improve my vertical relationship, that helps my horizontal relationships.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? What keeps you grounded? How do you find that in your life?
Uh, that that's actually not an easy question. For
Mm,
um, I'm a pacifist,
mm,
always have been. I don't understand violence,
mm,
particularly um, violence and aggression from men to anybody. I
mm,
simply don't understand that. And when I was at school, one of the things that hit me hard was the difference between how um, Darwin's ideas were taken and misunderstood and
mm,
promoted, um, and a naturalist who lived around the same time, Peter Kropotkin, a Russian, who did most of his research in Siberia and cold climates rather than the warm waters of the South Pacific, who saw that both within and between communities, it was cooperation that ensured
mm,
survival. And that always made sense to me. And when I'm addressing an audience, and I do a lot of public speaking, as you know, and anything
mm,
500 to 1,000 people at any one time. One of the things that very often catches me out is when I stand at the lectern, the applause, I've been introduced, the applause dies down, and I look at my audience. I just see humanity,
mm,
and and on several occasions that's choked me up, and I haven't been able to start for several seconds
mm,
because of the love, not that I feel for them, but that I sense from them to me.
mm,
And I think one of the important things is a lot of the feelings and sensations that would allow us to connect differently with each other have been suppressed by
mm,
the society we're in today, that materialistic, competitive notion of we must be growing economically all the time and what's your GDP now? Um, it's suppressed a lot of the instinct in terms of caring for each other.
mm. Yes. Yeah. I appreciate that. So this is a bit unique. I'm going to do rapid fire questions here. This is something we haven't done on the podcast before.
Right.
but I've got 4 questions and I want to see what comes up for you right off the bat. But if you had to share any book or books and ideas to the audience, what would they be to get them inspired?
Oh my goodness. Oh, rapid fire. Oh no. Um, uh, Goodness me. I have read so much in my life. I mean, I've just read so much. There's not one book comes through at all.
Mm,
There are
mm,
so many. I guess if I'm sorry, rapid fire, it would have to be the Oxford English Dictionary
okay. And why is that?
because it's given me the language to be very precise about how I express ideas which are not common.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Next one, I think this might be easier, I hope. In terms of leadership, what would be one quality that you would suggest to people to focus on?
Stewardship, not leadership. Stewardship. It's about caring for each other in the environment. It's absolutely critical. It is the number one.
Okay, perfect. Next one, for society and future, what would you offer for us to think about?
Humility.
Okay.
Humility as a species and not believing that we are everything that other life is not.
Hmm. And then the last one, what are your personal reflections based on things that you've been thinking about lately?
Oh dear, I have so many ideas going around in my mind all the time. The most important one is the philosophy I've been working on now for 5 to 6 years. It's called Ecority, and it's some portmanteau word shoving ecology together with security. And the greatest threat to human security is our treatment of the planet. And
Mm,
for me, there is one planet. This is our home. We need to care for it and look after it. And so, equality is the philosophy of relating to each other and to the planet in ways that are beneficial.
mm, amazing. Thank you so much, Richard, for this conversation. I learned so much. I've taken so many notes that I need to go look up things and learn about. But and thank you for your wisdom. I really value talking to people such as yourself who've been around for a while, right? And I don't say that as a joke. I think it's important to acknowledge that. I think sometimes we dispense with the wisdom that people like yourself have to offer. So to me, this is a gift to be able to talk to you and learn from you. And yeah, I appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. Can I leave you with one thought because it comes
Yes.
back to that sense of fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
When I was going through med school, I got a scholarship and I was studying
Mm,
medicine, but I still needed to work. So I was in England, and I got a job as a milkman. Where you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you have this electronic milk float, and you deliver milk door to door in bottles. Uh, and I was doing this for about 2 months, and I would do it quickly. So I'd run, and
mm,
then I'd have to drink some of the milk that I was carrying, and I could never balance the books. And after 2 months, the general manager in the dairy called me and he said, "Lad," he called me lad all the time.
mm,
Could never remember names, I don't think. He said, "Lad, I've got to let you go." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I'm giving you the sack. You can't balance the books. I'm sorry. I know,
mm,
you've got. I can't have you around." And he said,
mm,
"Well, I'm going to give you some advice." And bearing in mind, I was studying medicine at the time and
mm,
oncology in particular. He said, "If you can't do this job, you'll never amount to anything."
mm,
That was the advice I got. And I decided that would not be the case. And I think
mm,
everyone has to have that moment where you think that will not be the case because I
mm,
am who I am and I'll show
mm.
people.
Yeah. No, and that brings up memories for me as well, where I've had those moments where I've been challenged and I've taken it on, right? And I think it goes back to your point earlier about resilience.
Yeah.
And I think we need to foster that. Unfortunately, I see a lack of resilience at times in my conversations with people. And to your point, also around that we've found easy solutions or shortcuts to not seek and build resilience. So I hope we
Yeah,
continue to do
that's
that.
true. And remember, Farhan, that the real thing there is, I say to a lot of people, it's not your fault. We need to create the conditions for you to be the person you really are.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
important.
Yes, absolutely.
It's been a joy talking to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, and final, like just to before we end this, if people wanted to learn more about your work, find your writing, what are some ways they can do that?
The easiest go to is the website, which
Hmm.
contains everything,
Yes.
which is www.richardhames.com.
All right. Well, we'll put that in the show notes for listeners to learn
Wonderful.
more about you and your work. But yes, thank you again.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.